What if I told you that right now, somewhere in an American prison, sits a man whose life was completely destroyed by a single photograph? A man who traded his wife's love for gold-plated lies, only to discover that the woman who promised him everything was actually a criminal mastermind using him as her perfect pawn? Have you ever wondered what you'd do if someone offered you a life of luxury beyond your wildest dreams? Would you question their motives, or would you be too blinded by the glitter to see the trap closing around you? Do you know someone who's made choices that left you wondering how they could throw away everything that mattered? Here's the brutal truth: every single day, powerful predators target vulnerable people, using wealth and seduction as weapons. They don't care about the families they destroy or the innocent lives they ruin. They see weakness, and they strike. Tonight, I'm going to tell you about Clarissa, a Filipino maid whose American husband Daniel was systematically seduced and manipulated by one of Dubai's wealthiest women, Sheikha Mariam al-Rashid. What started as a chance encounter at a desert mansion would end with international money laundering investigations, shattered dreams, and a man behind bars, abandoned by the very woman who promised him the world. But before we go any further, if you're someone who values learning from other people's mistakes and protecting yourself from manipulation, hit that like button right now. And if you're serious about avoiding the devastating traps that destroyed this family, make sure you subscribe because I'm about to reveal warning signs that could save your life. Listen, I get it. Maybe you think you'll never face something like this. Maybe you believe you're too smart to fall for manipulation. But let me ask you something: if you won't even take 2 seconds to hit subscribe for content that could protect you and your loved ones, what makes you think you'd recognize a predator when they're standing right in front of you? Clarissa Mendoza's story begins where so many tales of heartbreak start, with hope and desperate love. Born in a small fishing village on the Philippine coast, she learned early that dreams were luxuries her family couldn't afford. While other teenagers attended school dances and worried about homework, 13-year-old Clarissa was already working as a house helper in neighboring cities, sending every peso home to feed her younger siblings. By her 20s, Clarissa faced the same impossible choice that haunts millions of women across developing nations: stay home and watch her family slowly starve, or leave everything behind to work as a domestic servant in a foreign country. Dubai called to her with promises of steady wages and the chance to finally lift her family out of poverty. The mansion where she worked in Dubai's exclusive Jumeirah district was a monument to excess: crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people earn in a lifetime. Marble imported from Italian quarries, golden fixtures that gleamed under desert sun. But while her employers lived like royalty above, Clarissa and the other domestic workers were packed into cramped quarters that felt more like a prison than a home. Yet through all the loneliness and backbreaking work, Clarissa held on to one beautiful thing: her relationship with Daniel Holloway. They'd met in the most modern way possible, through an online forum for migrant workers and expatriates. Daniel, a construction worker from Detroit, had watched his city crumble as industries fled and jobs vanished. When the economic collapse left him scrambling for odd repair jobs just to survive, he found solace in online communities where people shared stories of struggling to build better lives. Their conversation started casually but deepened into something real. Despite being separated by thousands of miles, they discovered they shared the same dream: opening a small restaurant where they could serve good food and build something meaningful together. In 2017, Daniel scraped together enough money to fly to the Philippines when Clarissa was visiting family, and they were married in a simple seaside ceremony with wildflowers and homemade decorations. The plan was beautifully simple: Clarissa would continue working in Dubai to save money while Daniel arranged his visa to join her. Together, they would build the life they'd dreamed about during those late-night video calls. If you've ever been in a long-distance relationship or watched someone you love sacrifice everything for your shared future, drop a comment below. These stories matter, and your experiences help others feel less alone in their struggles. 8 months later, when Daniel finally arrived in Dubai clutching his visitor visa, he stepped into a world that defied comprehension. Towers of glass and steel stretched into the sky like monuments to human ambition. Sports cars worth more than houses roared down boulevards lined with palm trees. The air itself seemed to shimmer with possibility and excess. Clarissa, overwhelmed with relief to finally hold her husband again, begged him to stay quiet about their marriage. Unapproved spouses of domestic workers faced constant scrutiny, and she couldn't risk losing the job that supported both their families. But fate, as it often does, had different plans waiting in the desert. At a private retreat owned by her employer's family, Clarissa was assigned to help prepare for an exclusive gala. The estate sat isolated among golden dunes, guarded like a fortress and decorated with the kind of opulence that made Dubai's city mansions look modest by comparison. It was here that Daniel first caught the attention of Sheikha Maryam al-Rashid. Unlike the reclusive members of her royal family, Maryam moved through international business circles like a force of nature. Beautiful, charismatic, and wielding the kind of wealth that could buy silence or loyalty with equal ease. She invested in luxury hotels across Europe, owned art galleries that displayed priceless masterpieces, and controlled fashion houses that dressed the world's elite. When staff struggled with a failing generator that threatened to ruin the gala preparations, Daniel stepped in. His hands, rough from years of construction work, quickly diagnosed and fixed the problem. While other workers moved with the practiced invisibility that domestic service demands, Daniel carried himself differently. He was American, yes, but more than that, he possessed an unpolished confidence that stood out in a world of bowing courtiers and obedient servants. Maryam noticed. And when someone with her power and resources notices you, your life is about to change forever. Within days, she personally requested Daniel to assist with renovations at one of her private residences. The pay was generous, more than Clarissa made in a month of grueling work. Grateful for the financial boost that could accelerate their restaurant dreams, Clarissa encouraged him to accept. She had no way of knowing that she was handing her husband directly to a predator who had already begun laying an elaborate trap. You know what breaks my heart about stories like this? People in the comments will say Clarissa should have known better, but they won't share this video to help others recognize these warning signs. If you're different, if you actually care about protecting families from manipulation, prove it by sharing this right now. Maryam's approach was masterful in its calculated subtlety. She didn't rush. She didn't make obvious advances. Instead, she did something far more dangerous. She made Daniel feel special. It started with invitations for tea after his work was finished. While other employers barely acknowledged their workers' existence, Maryam asked Daniel about his life in Detroit. She laughed at his stories about growing up working class, seemed genuinely fascinated by his descriptions of American culture, and listened with the kind of focused attention that makes anyone feel like the most interesting person in the room. Then came the gifts. A Rolex watch, supposedly a tip for fixing her imported sound system. Designer shoes that happened to be the wrong size for a male friend. Envelopes thick with cash that she claimed were bonuses for his exceptional work. Each gift came with a reasonable explanation, and Daniel, a man who had spent years struggling to afford basic necessities, found ways to justify accepting them. But Clarissa wasn't blind. She noticed the expensive cologne that lingered on his shirts, cologne she knew she hadn't bought. She saw how he started coming home later and later, always with new excuses about additional projects or equipment repairs. When she asked questions, his answers became evasive, defensive. The confrontation, when it finally came, revealed only part of the truth. Daniel admitted that Maryam had invited him to travel to Paris as part of her business entourage. He swore it was innocent, just technical support for her events and exhibitions. He was just there to oversee equipment, nothing more. His eyes couldn't quite meet hers as he made these promises. But the other staff members told a different story. They whispered about seeing Daniel by Maryam's side at exclusive venues, entering luxury hotel suites together, behaving less like employer and employee and more like lovers sharing secrets in the shadows of crystal chandeliers. The transformation in Daniel was becoming undeniable. The man who used to video call Clarissa every night now claimed he was too busy or tired. The husband who once planned their restaurant menu down to the smallest details now seemed bored by conversations about their future. He had tasted a world of private jets and sun-soaked balconies, exclusive clubs, and wine that cost more per bottle than most people earned in a week. Their cramped workers' quarters, once a temporary stepping stone to their dreams, now felt like a cage to him. And Miriam, with her endless resources and intoxicating attention, offered him a key to escape that cage, even if it meant leaving his wife behind. If you've ever watched someone you love change completely after meeting the wrong person, hit that like button. These warning signs are real, and recognizing them early can save relationships and lives. As Daniel sank deeper into Miriam's world, darker truths began to surface. The Sheikha's immense wealth, while certainly inherited from royal connections, was entangled in a web of questionable business dealings that stretched across 3 continents. Shell companies with anonymous ownership structures. Bank accounts in countries known for their financial secrecy. Art purchases and luxury real estate transactions that seemed designed more to move money than acquire assets. What appeared to be legitimate business investments were actually sophisticated money laundering operations, cleaning profits from smuggling networks that dealt in everything from rare artifacts to conflict diamonds. Daniel, intoxicated by his proximity to such wealth and power, either couldn't see or chose not to see what he was becoming part of. Miriam began giving him simple tasks: deliver this sealed envelope to a gallery owner in London, make a bank withdrawal using his American passport for identification, carry a locked briefcase to a meeting in Monaco. To Daniel, these seemed like minor errands that proved Miriam trusted him. In reality, he was being positioned as the perfect pawn, an outsider with clean credentials who could move freely through international airports without arousing the suspicion that might follow Miriam's associates. Meanwhile, Clarissa found herself trapped in a nightmare of her own making. Dubai's visa system tied her legal status directly to her employer, making escape nearly impossible. Even if she wanted to report what she was witnessing, who would believe the word of a domestic worker against someone with Miriam's influence? And if she tried to leave without permission, she faced imprisonment or deportation without the wages she desperately needed to support her family. She watched helplessly as her husband transformed into someone unrecognizable. The man who once treasured their simple dreams now spoke dismissively of small thinking and limited possibilities. He started wearing clothes that cost more than her monthly salary and carrying himself with an arrogance that made her stomach turn. But international law enforcement agencies were already watching. Financial intelligence units across Europe and the Gulf had begun tracing suspicious transaction patterns. Money flowing through luxury businesses in patterns that suggested systematic laundering. Art sales that didn't quite make sense. Real estate purchases by entities that seemed to exist only on paper. Miriam's name appeared on watch lists. Her associates were identified and monitored. And slowly, inevitably, Daniel's activities began appearing in surveillance reports. An American man making regular trips to financial institutions, carrying items for a woman under investigation for international money laundering. By the time Daniel realized the true scale of what he'd become involved in, escape was no longer an option. He was in too deep, had seen too much, knew too many details about operations that could destroy powerful people if exposed. The trap had closed completely, and he didn't even know it yet. Here's what terrifies me about sharing these stories: people will watch until the end to see how bad it gets, but they won't subscribe to learn how to protect themselves. Don't be like Daniel, blind to danger until it's too late. Subscribe now before you need these lessons desperately. The final shattering of Clarissa's heart came not through confrontation or confession, but through a photograph published in Dubai's most prestigious social magazine. Daniel stood beside Miriam at a charity gala, both of them dressed in evening wear that cost more than most people earn in a year. The caption described him as her American business consultant, a successful entrepreneur who specialized in international luxury ventures. There was no mention of wives or marriages, no acknowledgement of the woman who had sacrificed everything to build a life with this man. In that moment, Clarissa understood the full scope of what had been stolen from her. It wasn't just her husband, it was her very existence. Miriam had rewritten Daniel's entire identity, erasing every trace of the maid who had once been his wife, the woman who had worked herself to exhaustion to support their shared dreams. The cruelest part was how completely Daniel had embraced this new version of himself. Friends who knew Clarissa saw the photograph and asked her about it. Confused by the disconnect between the Daniel they knew and this polished stranger posing with royalty. She had no answers that wouldn't sound like the desperate lies of a jealous woman. Meanwhile, Daniel had stopped coming to their shared quarters altogether. Staff members reported seeing him leaving Miriam's private residence early in the morning, carrying designer luggage toward waiting luxury cars. When Clarissa finally confronted him in person, demanding to know if their marriage meant nothing to him, his response revealed how completely he'd been transformed. He spoke about evolving beyond provincial thinking and embracing opportunities that matched his potential. He claimed their restaurant dreams were small-minded fantasies that would have kept them trapped in mediocrity forever. The man who had once promised to build a life with her now looked at her with something approaching pity, as if she were a relic from a past he'd outgrown. But the most devastating blow came when he suggested she should be grateful. According to Daniel, his association with Miriam could potentially benefit Clarissa too. Perhaps she could be promoted within the household staff, maybe even receive better accommodations. He spoke as if their marriage was now a business arrangement that could be leveraged for small advantages. That night, alone in her tiny room while the mansion gleamed with golden light above her, Clarissa made a decision. She would leave Dubai, with or without permission. She would return home to her coastal village, to the humble life she'd tried so hard to escape. The dreams were dead, the marriage was over, and staying would only add more humiliation to heartbreak. She began quietly arranging her departure, selling the few possessions she'd accumulated and contacting family members who could help her navigate the journey home. Daniel, completely absorbed in his new life, didn't even notice she was preparing to disappear from his world entirely. If you've ever felt invisible to someone who once claimed to love you, drop a comment below. And if you're someone who actually learns from other people's pain instead of just watching it for entertainment, hit that subscribe button right now. You know what's sad? Thousands of people will watch this story but won't share it to protect others from similar manipulation. Don't be one of those people who consumes wisdom but won't pass it on. Share this video before you forget. The collapse, when it came, was as swift and brutal as a building demolition. International financial crimes units had spent months building their case against Miriam's network. Transaction records, travel patterns, surveillance footage, and testimony from informants created an airtight picture of sophisticated money laundering operations spanning multiple countries. When coordinated raids hit simultaneously across Dubai, London, Monaco, and New York, the entire criminal enterprise crumbled in a single morning. Daniel, returning from what he thought was a routine trip to a luxury villa, found himself surrounded by plainclothes officers who knew his name, his travel history, and details about activities he'd assumed were private. The interrogation lasted 14 hours, during which investigators presented evidence that painted him not as an innocent pawn, but as a willing participant in international financial crimes. Bank surveillance footage showed him making large cash withdrawals using accounts linked to shell companies. Airport security cameras captured him carrying sealed packages through customs in multiple countries. Hotel records documented his presence at meetings where millions of dollars in illicit assets changed hands. Miriam, protected by layers of diplomatic immunity and legal representation that money could buy, vanished into the shadowy world where the ultra-wealthy weighed out investigations. Her lawyers released carefully worded statements expressing confidence in her innocence while distancing her from any associates who might face prosecution. But Daniel had no such protections. Within 48 hours, he was deported from Dubai as a persona non grata. The man who had lived in luxury penthouses found himself on a commercial flight back to Detroit, handcuffed to a federal marshal. The designer clothes were replaced with prison-issued uniforms. The Rolex watch and expensive shoes were catalogued as evidence. His trial in federal court revealed the full scope of his involvement in the money laundering network. Prosecutors presented evidence of his participation in at least 12 separate transactions totaling over $40 million in illicit funds. Defense attorneys argued he was manipulated and deceived, but the evidence suggested someone who had willingly participated once he understood the benefits. The judge, sentencing Daniel to 8 years in federal prison, noted that greed had transformed him from victim to accomplice. "You traded your integrity, your marriage, and your freedom for the illusion of wealth," she said. "The consequences will last far longer than any luxury you briefly enjoyed." Meanwhile, Clarissa had already returned to her village by the sea, carrying nothing but the bitter knowledge that her sacrifice had been for nothing. The remittances she'd sent home over the years had helped her family survive, but the greater dream, the restaurant, the partnership, the life they'd planned together, lay shattered beyond repair. Share this video right now if you believe people need to understand how manipulation destroys lives. These aren't just entertaining stories, they're warnings that could save someone you care about. Today, 3 years after Daniel's conviction, the ripple effects of this tragedy continue spreading through multiple lives. Clarissa did eventually open her small seaside restaurant, just as she'd always dreamed. But instead of sharing that dream with a loving partner, she runs it alone. Serving fresh fish and local dishes to neighbors who remember her as the girl who left to make a better life. The eatery succeeds because of her determination and hard work, but success tastes different when it's flavored with betrayal and loss. Daniel remains in federal prison, scheduled for release in 4 more years. Friends who have visited report that he speaks with deep regret about the choices that destroyed his marriage and freedom. But regret cannot undo the damage or restore what was lost. Sheikha Mariam al-Rashid's name still appears occasionally in international business publications, always in connection with legitimate investments and charitable activities. The investigation into her network resulted in several convictions among lower-level associates, but her wealth and connections insulated her from serious consequences. She continues living a life of luxury while others paid the price for her criminal enterprises. The lessons from this tragedy are clear and urgent. Predators who target vulnerable people through seduction and material temptation rely on their victims being isolated, desperate, and blinded by sudden wealth. They offer gifts that seem too good to refuse, create emotional connections that feel genuine, and gradually involve their targets in activities that become increasingly compromising. Warning signs include someone showering you with expensive gifts early in a relationship, isolating you from family and friends who might question their motives, asking you to perform tasks that seem slightly unusual or secretive, and encouraging you to think of yourself as special or chosen for unique opportunities. Most importantly, when someone's affection seems tied to your willingness to participate in activities you don't fully understand, you're being manipulated, not loved. Clarissa's story reminds us that real love supports your dreams without asking you to abandon your values. It builds you up without requiring you to tear others down. And it never asks you to choose between your integrity and your happiness. If this video opened your eyes to dangers you hadn't considered before, subscribe immediately and share it with someone who needs to see it. But if you're the type of person who consumes content without acting on it, ask yourself, what makes you think you'd recognize manipulation when it's happening to you personally if you won't even take action on the wisdom that could protect you? The comments section is where we learn from each other's experiences and build a community that refuses to let predators succeed. Tell us about warning signs you've noticed, share your own experiences with manipulation, and help others avoid the traps that destroyed this family. Remember, knowledge only has power when we act on it. Don't just watch these stories. Learn from them, share them, and use them to protect yourself and the people you love. Because somewhere out there, another predator is looking for their next victim. Make sure it's not you.